Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. Those words would haunt Officer Martinez for the rest of his life. Judge Kesha Williams approached the courthouse in her civilian clothes, a leather briefcase in hand, unaware that today would test every ounce of her patience, poise, and judicial authority. Martinez, stationed at the entrance, spotted her from the corner of his eye. His sneer twisted with instant judgment. Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in, he thought. Before she could even lift her badge or explain her presence, Martinez shoved his palm against her cheek. The force made her head snap sideways, scattering the papers from her briefcase across the stone steps like confetti. He grabbed her by the throat, pressing her back against the wall as his words echoed through the morning air. Other officers gathered, smirking, some recording with their phones, all complicit in the humiliation. But Kesha's eyes didn't waver. They locked on the bronze plaque above the courthouse doors, a quiet determination burning behind her calm exterior. Inside the courthouse, Martinez straightened his uniform, mentally rehearsing his story. The system always believed cops over civilians, especially when those civilians were black women. Your Honor. He began, voice steady, smooth, rehearsed. I was conducting standard security protocols when I observed a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security. His eyes flicked toward Kesha, seated at the defendant's table, her left cheek already bruising purple. Judge Harrison, a temporary fill-in with a thin frame and nervous demeanor, nodded. And what exactly did you observe, officer? She was dressed inappropriately for court, carrying documents that appeared suspicious. When I approached to investigate, she became verbally aggressive, used profanity, and threatened staff. Martinez replied, warming to his narrative. Two officers exchanged subtle glances. They had heard the same story dozens of times, different faces, same script. The courtroom nodded along, the air heavy with bias and unquestioned authority. Did she resist arrest? Harrison asked. Absolutely, sir, Martinez replied. She became combative. I used minimal necessary force to ensure safety. His voice trembled slightly, a crack in the armor, but the courtroom barely noticed. Kesha finally spoke, calm, almost eerily composed. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Nothing, Your Honor. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Nothing, she said softly, eyes blazing with controlled fury. Martinez continued, oblivious to the storm brewing. He painted her as manipulative, unstable, and dishonest, weaving a narrative of criminal intent, fraud, and a calculated victimhood. The prosecutor nodded, fully absorbed in Martinez's performance, reinforcing his lies with a nod and a sympathetic expression. Meanwhile, Kesha's mind raced. Each claim, each fabrication was a thread she could pull, a trap she could set. Every smirk, every dismissive glance would become evidence of bias, of a system built to oppress, not protect. She listened, unmoving, absorbing details, cataloging each lie for later. Martinez's colleagues testified in his favor. Yes, ma'am. Officer Rodriguez said, I witnessed the incident. Martinez acted professionally. Thompson echoed the sentiment. Their words hung in the courtroom like a shield, but Kesha was already dismantling it mentally. You're telling this court that I was aggressive, carrying suspicious documents, resisting arrest, she said, finally rising. Her handcuffs clinked softly, the sound a subtle drumbeat of impending reckoning. Let's examine that evidence. She gestured to the scattered papers collected on the evidence table. They were authentic. Pending case files, memoranda, correspondence, all within her rightful access. Judge Harrison's confidence began to falter as Kesha continued. She explained her constitutional right to be on the public sidewalk, the Supreme Court precedents, and the protections afforded to citizens approaching government buildings. Martinez's composure slipped. The narrative he had built with rehearsed confidence was cracking under the weight of truth. Kesha methodically dismantled every accusation. No verbal aggression, no fraud, no unauthorized access. She invoked federal evidence rules, called for preservation of all surveillance, and hinted at recordings he had forgotten. Her voice carried the precision of someone born to command a courtroom. The bailiff, Henderson, pale with recognition, handed her judicial robes and ceremonial gavel. As she donned the flowing black robes, Kesha felt the transformation. Every fiber, every fold, every glint of gold trim was a mantle of authority and justice. The bruise on her cheek was no longer a mark of humiliation, but a symbol of the system's failure and her power to restore it. Phones buzzed with messages, clerks were frantic. She reassured them quickly, rescheduling hearings, clearing her calendar. Her calmness was deceptive, each movement strategic. She called Chief Judge Margaret Carter, issuing orders to preserve surveillance and gather evidence of Officer Martinez's history, revealing the systematic misconduct she had been investigating for months with the FBI and Department of Justice. When she returned to the courtroom, every head turned. All rise. Henderson's voice boomed. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding. A shock rippled through the room. Martinez froze, realizing too late who he had assaulted. The temporary judge paled, the prosecutor's mouth fell open, and the spectators whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. Kesha's eyes swept the courtroom, each glance cutting like a blade. She took her seat behind the bench, gavel in hand, every inch the commanding presence she had been for 23 years. Officer Martinez, she said quietly, voice cold, controlled, you may remain standing. He trembled, pale, unable to form words. His lies, his arrogance, his false narrative, all unraveling in real time. You testified under oath that I was aggressive, carrying suspicious documents, attempting fraud. Do you remember that? She asked, each word deliberate. Aye. Martinez stammered. I will now show you the evidence. Kesha continued, pulling up the courthouse surveillance. The room fell silent as footage played, showing her walking calmly, his unprovoked assault, the slaps, the handcuffs. His own words, filthy animals, cages, not courthouse. She's echoed in the courtroom, undeniable. She showed backup footage from his body cam, revealing the full incident he had claimed malfunctioned. She played Thompson's audio, exposing laughter, derogatory remarks, and casual bias. Officers who had testified on his behalf shifted uncomfortably, many inching toward the exit. Martinez sank into his chair, the reality of his career, actions, and lies collapsing around him. You asked me earlier if I knew my place, Kesha said, voice ringing with authority. My place is here, on this bench, holding people like you accountable. For the past 6 months, I've been documenting systemic misconduct, patterns of racial bias, and today, you provided the evidence we needed. You assaulted a federal judge while she performed her duties. You committed perjury. And now, Officer Martinez, you will face the consequences. The gavel came down with thunderous finality. Martinez's knees buckled. His career, freedom, and reputation were hanging by a thread, and Judge Kesha Williams, composed, resolute, and unstoppable, was the force ensuring justice would prevail. The courtroom felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, aware that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Martinez sat frozen, his uniform a grotesque parody of authority, eyes darting around for some escape, some ally. But there were none. Kesha's calm had become a storm, her robe flowing like dark water, her gavel a scepter of retribution. Every clerk, every officer, every observer could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a courtroom incident anymore. It was an unmasking, a reckoning, and Martinez was the first domino. Kesha didn't waste a second. Bailiff, please bring forward the list of prior complaints filed against Officer Martinez, she said, her voice steady, each syllable deliberate. The room murmured. Whispers rippled through the benches, complaints about excessive force, racial bias, intimidation, most ignored or buried by the very system Martinez thought would protect him. As the list was read aloud, the murmur grew into a hum of disbelief. Martinez's colleagues shifted nervously. One by one, names and dates were confirmed, misconduct overlooked, victims silenced. The courtroom became a gallery of truth, each item a nail in the coffin of Martinez's false narrative. Kesha's gaze never wavered. It was fixed, piercing, like sunlight through storm clouds, exposing every shadow he had tried to hide behind. She turned to the prosecution. You relied solely on Officer Martinez's testimony without corroboration, she said sharply. Where was your due diligence? Where were the recordings, the independent witnesses, the verification of claims? The prosecutor swallowed, the color draining from his face. His smug confidence had evaporated under the gravity of Kesha's authority. He had underestimated her entirely. Kesha signaled Henderson, the bailiff, who handed her the folder of incident reports, body cam files, and witness statements she had requested earlier. We will examine each piece, she continued methodically, and we will note discrepancies between reported events and actual evidence. Officer Martinez, these discrepancies are not minor. They are indicative of intentional misrepresentation, of perjury, and assault upon a federal judge. Martinez tried to speak, a weak stammer, but Kesha cut him off with a simple lift of her hand. Silence fell over the room. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed muted under the intensity of her presence. She clicked a remote, and the surveillance footage expanded on the large monitor behind her. Every movement, every shove, every slap replayed in slow motion. The courtroom collectively winced. No one could argue with the raw, undeniable proof. Then she turned her attention to the other officers in the room. You observed this incident and failed to intervene. You laughed, recorded, and allowed a federal judge to be assaulted. Your silence is complicity. Each of you will be held accountable for what you witnessed today. A few officers looked down, guilty, while others exchanged worried whispers. The courtroom doors swung open, and a team of investigators entered, FBI patches visible on their jackets. Kesha nodded at them, her presence alone commanding respect. We'll take the collected evidence for federal review, she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. This will include Officer Martinez's prior complaints and all footage of today's incident. The murmurs rose into outright chatter as spectators realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a black woman defending her rights. This was a full-scale dismantling of corruption and bias in the courthouse itself. Journalists in the gallery whispered furiously into their phones, already crafting headlines about the judge who had turned the system on its head. Martinez's defense attorney, pale and flustered, attempted to interject. Your Honor, my client, sit down, Kesha interrupted, her gavel tapping lightly against the desk. There will be no excuses, no deflections. Today is about truth. The truth is not negotiable. Her eyes shifted to Martinez. Do you understand that assaulting a federal judge is not a misdemeanor? That perjury carries significant penalties? That your colleague's complicity does not absolve you? He nodded weakly, but Kesha could see the panic behind his eyes. Every scenario he had imagined for controlling this incident had collapsed. The smug certainty he had relied upon was gone, replaced by a paralyzing fear he could not suppress. Kesha leaned forward, voice softening, deceptively gentle. Officer Martinez, I am giving you an opportunity. Tell the truth, acknowledge your actions, accept responsibility. It will not erase what happened, but it may mitigate consequences. He hesitated. Pride, arrogance, and fear collided in his mind. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Sweat beaded along his forehead. The entire courtroom watched, holding its collective breath. Finally, he whispered, barely audible, I assaulted her. Kesha's eyes narrowed. She leaned back slightly, gavel resting on the desk. You admitted it, but your testimony also included lies. Do you intend to correct the record fully? Yes, ma'am, he mumbled. His voice lacked conviction, but it was a start. Kesha nodded. Very well. We will document your admission, and the Federal Review will determine the extent of disciplinary and legal action. Meanwhile, This courtroom will proceed with full scrutiny of evidence against you. You are no longer a witness. You are a subject of the investigation." The room erupted in whispers again. Martinez slumped, the weight of accountability pressing down. Kesha rose, moving gracefully around the bench, her presence commanding absolute focus. "And let this serve as notice to all who occupy positions of authority. Power without accountability is dangerous, and injustice unchecked is temporary. Today, we correct that." She signaled Henderson to secure Martinez and escort him to a holding area. Cameras captured every step, every moment a public testament to the power shift. Spectators, reporters, and courthouse staff alike were stunned into silence. They had come expecting a routine court day. Instead, they witnessed a judge reclaiming authority, demanding justice, and exposing systemic corruption with surgical precision. As the room began to settle, Kesha turned to the staff. "All proceedings today will be documented, all evidence preserved. This is a turning point. We will ensure that no officer, no staff member, and no person can use fear or bias to intimidate or harm another under the guise of authority." Her voice resonated like steel and velvet combined. The courthouse, once a theater of intimidation, had become a stage for justice. The whispers turned into a hum of respect, awe, and fear, because Kesha Williams had just shown that authority could be wielded not for oppression, but for truth. In that moment, the bruise on her cheek no longer mattered. The humiliation, the pain, the slaps, they had all been transformed into power. And everyone in that room, from Martinez to the spectators to the officers, understood something fundamental. A judge who stood for justice was unstoppable, and today was only the beginning. As she sat back down behind the bench, gavel in hand, the sunlight catching the edges of her robe just so, she allowed herself a brief smile. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting the record straight. And the record, for once, would speak the truth. The courthouse doors swung open once more, and whispers filled the hallways. Word had spread outside. People who had been silenced, intimidated, or ignored were listening. They would know that Kesha Williams had restored not just order, but faith. The fight wasn't over. It would continue in investigations, hearings, and reforms. But one thing was clear. Officer Martinez had underestimated her. The system had underestimated her. And now, everyone would learn the cost of that mistake. Kesha leaned forward, eyes scanning the room one last time, her voice soft but commanding. "Let this day mark the start of accountability, transparency, and justice for all, not just for the privileged. And may every officer, every official, and every citizen take note. Authority carries responsibility, and actions have consequences." The gavel landed once more, echoing like a warning and a promise. The room fell silent, the weight of truth settling over everyone like a mantle. Outside, the world waited to see the ripple effects of what had just transpired inside this courthouse. And Kesha Williams, undaunted and resolute, knew she had just rewritten the rules of the game. The courthouse corridors were buzzing like never before. Word of the incident had leaked almost instantly. Smartphones captured snippets of the courtroom drama, and news outlets were already framing the story as a reckoning in real time. Kesha didn't allow herself to be distracted. She moved with purpose, passing through hallways where whispers followed her like shadows. Every step was measured, every glance calculated. Today, she wasn't just enforcing the law. She was redefining it. Back in her chambers, she began reviewing the files in detail. Martinez's past complaints, disciplinary records, and internal memos painted a clear, damning picture. There were inconsistencies, ignored warnings, and patterns of abuse that no one had addressed. As she sifted through the documents, her assistant, Jasmine, knocked lightly and entered. "Your Honor, the press is camped outside. They're calling this the slap heard around the courthouse," Jasmine said, trying to suppress a nervous laugh. "And social media is already buzzing." Kesha allowed herself a small smile. "Good," she said. "Let them talk. Let them see that justice can't be silenced, but our work is far from over. Every officer involved, every report, every witness. We need to ensure nothing is overlooked." Jasmine nodded, impressed by Kesha's composure. "What's the next step?" "We begin with transparency," Kesha replied. "We will meet with federal investigators, provide all evidence, and ensure that this case sets a precedent. And—" She paused, locking eyes with Jasmine. "We make sure the community sees that accountability is real, and it starts at the top." Meanwhile, Martinez sat in the holding area, still pale, still shaking. He hadn't fully grasped the storm he had unleashed. The first bite of reality had hit hard. His colleagues were distancing themselves, whispers behind his back growing louder, and the cameras outside were waiting to capture his every move. An investigator approached him, badge glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Mr. Martinez, we'll need a full statement. The assault, the misconduct, everything you've done that may have violated your oath of duty." Martinez swallowed hard. I understand," he stammered. The gravity of the situation pressed down on him like a physical weight. No amount of bravado could mask the fear now. Back in the courtroom, Kesha prepared for the next hearing, reviewing witness statements and video footage. Each frame reinforced the narrative she was constructing, a story of accountability, courage, and the dismantling of entrenched corruption. She knew the public would watch closely, but she also knew she had a responsibility beyond spectacle. Outside, the community had begun to gather, curious and inspired. Residents who had long felt powerless in the face of systemic injustices saw something extraordinary unfolding. Phones were raised to record every glimpse, every detail. The energy was electric, charged with anticipation and hope. A local reporter, microphone in hand, approached the courthouse steps. "Judge Williams, can you comment on the recent events? People are calling this historic." Kesha remained composed. "Justice isn't about spectacle," she said evenly, her voice carrying over the crowd. "It's about accountability. Today, we've taken the first steps to ensure that no one can misuse their authority without consequence. This is about creating a system that works for everyone, not just those in power." The crowd murmured in approval. Social media feeds were already erupting, sharing clips, quotes, and reactions. The courthouse had become a symbol not just of authority, but of moral courage. Inside, Kesha returned to her chambers. She opened a folder containing letters from community members, stories of mistreatment, intimidation, and systemic bias. Each letter was a reminder of why she had taken the bench in the first place. She read each one carefully, making notes, planning how to incorporate these narratives into broader reform initiatives. The phone rang. It was the head of the Federal Oversight Committee. "Judge Williams, we've reviewed preliminary reports. Your handling of today's incident has been exemplary. We'd like to meet to discuss next steps for investigation and potential policy reforms." Kesha leaned back, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. "Thank you," she said. "I'll prepare the documentation and ensure full cooperation. This isn't about accolades. It's about accountability, justice, and systemic change." Hours later, as the courthouse quieted, Kesha reviewed the footage of the assault again. She watched Martinez's expression shift from smugness to fear, noting the exact moment the weight of his actions became undeniable. She knew that for him, this was only the beginning. Every disciplinary measure, every investigation, and every legal consequence would be a direct result of choices he had made. She closed her laptop and looked out the window at the city beyond. Lights flickered on in buildings across the skyline. Somewhere out there, people were discussing the events of the day, debating, inspired, outraged, but above all, aware that justice could be served. And she, Kesha Williams, had ensured that they would see it happen in real time. As she prepared to leave the courthouse for the night, she paused. A young woman approached, hesitant but determined. "Judge Williams, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "My family has faced harassment by officers, and we felt powerless. Seeing what you did today, it gives us hope." Kesha smiled, a rare, warm expression that softened her formidable presence. "Thank you," she said, "but don't just hope. Stand up, speak out, and demand accountability. Change begins with courage, and courage comes from action." The young woman nodded, inspired, and disappeared into the night. Kesha took a deep breath, knowing the path ahead would be challenging, but certain that each step she took fortified the foundation of justice. Back in the holding area, Martinez was still grappling with reality. He had no idea how deeply the investigation would reach, nor how public scrutiny would magnify his failures. Calls to colleagues went unanswered. Whispers in the precinct spoke of his imminent suspension and possible charges. Every action he had taken to manipulate authority had crumbled under the weight of transparency and truth. And while Martinez's world unraveled, Kesha prepared for the next phase, ensuring systemic reform, protecting witnesses, and building a precedent that would ripple far beyond one courthouse or one incident. She understood the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just about one assault, one officer, or one courtroom. This was about changing the culture of power, exposing corruption, and giving a voice to those who had long been silenced. As night fell, the courthouse lights glowed against the city skyline, a beacon of justice and accountability. Kesha Williams remained at her desk, reviewing case files, making calls, and planning. The battle was far from over, but she had made one thing abundantly clear. Abuse of power would no longer go unchallenged, and somewhere deep within the city, people whispered, inspired and emboldened. If one woman could stand up to an entire system, maybe, just maybe, they could too. The next morning, the courthouse hummed with activity. News crews had camped outside overnight, turning the building into an unofficial stage for a national reckoning. Kesha arrived early, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors, carrying nothing but her files and an unwavering resolve. Every eye seemed to track her movement, some with admiration, some with resentment, but she ignored them. Her focus was on what truly mattered: justice, accountability, and ensuring that no one, regardless of status, could escape the consequences of their actions. In the briefing room, Kesha met with federal investigators, legal aides, and community representatives. The room was tense, the weight of the moment pressed down like a physical presence. She opened the session, speaking clearly, her voice firm yet calm. "We are here to ensure that transparency is not just a concept but a reality," she said. "Every officer involved, every witness, every document must be accounted for. This is about more than one incident. It is about restoring public trust." The investigators nodded, impressed by her meticulous preparation. They had anticipated resistance, bureaucratic obstacles, but Kesha's approach left no room for delay. The evidence, meticulously gathered and catalogued, painted a vivid picture of misconduct, negligence, and abuse of authority. Meanwhile, Martinez's situation worsened by the hour. Calls from his superiors grew tense, colleagues distanced themselves, and social media continued to amplify the story. His face, captured in multiple videos displaying aggression and disregard, had become a symbol of accountability for some, and a cautionary tale for others. During a break in proceedings, Kesha received a call from a young woman named Simone, who had anonymously submitted a series of reports exposing misconduct within the same precinct. Her voice trembled, yet carried a quiet strength. "Judge Williams, I want to thank you," Simone said. "You've made me feel seen. We've been silenced for so long, but seeing what you've done, there's hope now." Kesha smiled faintly. "Courage matters, Simone, but it's not enough to hope. You must act. Document everything, speak truthfully, and know that the law can protect those who step forward." The day progressed with intense questioning of witnesses, analysis of surveillance footage, and the painstaking verification of reports. Kesha guided every session, ensuring that nothing was dismissed, that every voice was heard, and that every discrepancy was addressed. Her leadership radiated authority, but also empathy. rare combination that inspired confidence in the room. By late afternoon, word spread that the courthouse would hold an emergency hearing to determine immediate disciplinary actions. The community gathered outside, chanting and holding signs demanding justice. Cameras recorded every moment, social media exploded with updates, and the pressure on the institution became palpable. Inside, Kesha presided over the hearing with steely determination. Martinez was present, his composure fraying under the scrutiny. Every piece of evidence was presented: witness testimonies, video footage, internal memos, and previous complaints. The courtroom absorbed the tension, the collective anticipation palpable. Martinez attempted to defend himself, fumbling through excuses and shifting blame. But each argument was met with clear, undeniable evidence. Kesha allowed him to speak, demonstrating fairness, but her expression left no doubt. Ruth had a way of speaking louder than lies. The community's representatives provided heartfelt testimonies, recounting incidents of intimidation, harassment, and fear that had long gone unaddressed. Their voices resonated in the courtroom, lending gravity and humanity to the proceedings. Kesha listened intently, nodding, occasionally taking notes. She understood the weight of their courage. Every word was a small act of resistance against a system that had often turned a blind eye. Finally, after hours of deliberation, Kesha stood, her gaze sweeping the room. This court will not tolerate abuse of authority. Effective immediately, Officer Martinez is suspended pending further investigation. A full inquiry will be conducted, and all findings will be made public. Let this serve as a reminder: accountability is not negotiable, and justice will always find a way. Gasps, murmurs, and applause filled the room. The decision was historic, not just for the individuals involved, but for the system itself. It was a clear signal that abuse could no longer hide behind badges or bureaucracy. Outside, the crowd erupted in celebration. Residents cheered, tears streamed down faces, and chants of solidarity echoed through the streets. Social media amplified the moment, broadcasting live footage that would reach millions worldwide. For many, it was a turning point, a visible, undeniable demonstration that justice could prevail. In the days that followed, the ripple effects were felt across the precinct and beyond. Officers who had previously operated with impunity began to reconsider their actions. Internal reviews were initiated, policies were revisited, and a renewed emphasis on ethics and accountability permeated the institution. Martinez faced further investigations, and the likelihood of severe disciplinary measures loomed. His colleagues, once silent, now spoke out, condemning the misconduct and supporting systemic reforms. The courthouse, once a symbol of routine legal proceedings, had become a beacon of hope and transformation. Kesha returned to her chambers, reviewing community letters, legal reports, and plans for long-term reforms. She knew the battle was far from over. There would always be those who resisted change, who clung to power at the expense of others, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every step taken, every voice heard, and every action taken in the name of justice reinforced the foundation she was building. As night fell, the city lights shimmered across the skyline. Kesha gazed out of her office window, reflecting on the day's events. Courage had sparked accountability. Integrity had demanded transparency, and the ripple of hope she had helped create promised a future where justice was not a privilege, but a right. The young woman from the previous day, Simone, had left a note on Kesha's desk. "Because of you, we believe again." Kesha smiled, placing the note carefully in her folder. It was a small symbol of the larger impact. One life, one action, one courthouse could change everything. And somewhere, across the city, families, community members, and even skeptical observers realized something profound. Courage and integrity could rewrite the rules, and those who once wielded power without accountability would finally be reminded that justice, though patient, is relentless. The journey wasn't over, but the foundation had been laid. The courthouse, the city, and the people had witnessed a moment of reckoning. And Kesha Williams, with her unwavering resolve, had proven that one person could indeed change the course of many lives, setting a precedent that would resonate for years to come. The following morning, the courthouse was quieter, but the tension was far from gone. Kesha arrived earlier than usual, reviewing reports and updates from the night before. The suspension of Officer Martinez had set off a chain reaction, triggering internal reviews across multiple precincts, and there was no room for error. Every move now was scrutinized. Every decision could either strengthen the momentum of reform or allow old systems of power to regain control. Kesha's phone buzzed incessantly. Community leaders, reporters, colleagues, and even anonymous sources flooding her inbox with updates, concerns, and tips. Each message reinforced the reality that this was bigger than a single case. It was a systemic reckoning. She prioritized a few critical leads, beginning with a tip from Simone, the young whistleblower, who had uncovered documents indicating that the misconduct extended far beyond the initial incident. "These reports show a pattern," Simone said during their call. "It's not just one officer. There are multiple instances of abuse, cover-ups, and intimidation. People are scared to speak up, but the files are there. You just need to see them." Kesha arranged an immediate secure meeting. Within the walls of a private conference room, they reviewed hundreds of pages of internal memos, incident reports, and employee complaints. The scale of the misconduct was staggering, yet the clarity of the evidence was undeniable. "This is massive," Kesha murmured, "but this is exactly why transparency is non-negotiable. If we expose this, it could shake the entire department." Meanwhile, Martinez was struggling. The suspension had ignited whispers among colleagues, and public scrutiny was relentless. Calls from his superiors were curt. His social media feed was flooded with criticism, and his personal life was unraveling under the glare of exposure. He began to realize that evasion and denial would no longer shield him from consequences. Back at the courthouse, Kesha coordinated with federal investigators to prepare for the next phase, a full-scale inquiry into systemic misconduct. The evidence gathered by Simone, combined with video footage, witness statements, and internal documentation, created an airtight foundation. Each piece was meticulously catalogued to withstand scrutiny, leaving no room for loopholes. The day's proceedings drew public attention once again. Families, community members, and advocates gathered outside, their faces determined and hopeful. For many, this was more than just a case. It was a moment of accountability, a promise that the voices long ignored would finally be heard. Inside, Kesha began the inquiry hearings. Officers, administrators, and witnesses were called one by one. Many attempted to downplay incidents or shift blame, but Kesha's preparation and command of evidence made evasion impossible. Each statement, each document, and each cross-examination chipped away at the facade of institutional invulnerability. During a tense moment in the hearing, an officer named Daniels, who had long been complicit in covering up misconduct, tried to dismiss the allegations. His tone was defensive, and he assumed the courtroom would side with him. Kesha leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Daniels," she said, her voice steady and resolute, "this court has before it undeniable evidence. Silence and complicity will not shield you. Accountability is not selective. It applies to every individual within this institution." The courtroom went silent. Daniels faltered, realizing that his usual tactics of intimidation and obfuscation no longer worked. Witnesses who had previously feared retaliation found courage, providing statements that corroborated evidence and painted a fuller picture of systemic failure. Outside, the community's anticipation grew. Every update from the courthouse was shared in real time on social media. The story resonated nationally, with people from other cities and states commenting on the courage of the victims and the determination of the judiciary. The narrative was shifting. This was no longer an isolated incident, but a landmark moment in the fight for accountability. As the hearings progressed, Kesha also made room for restorative dialogue. She met with community leaders and activists, listening to their concerns and planning strategies to ensure that changes weren't temporary but institutionalized. Policies were drafted, training programs were proposed, and oversight committees were suggested to prevent future abuses. Meanwhile, Martinez faced an internal investigation that threatened to end his career. The more he attempted to defend himself, the clearer it became that his actions were indefensible. His colleagues began cooperating with investigators, some providing damning evidence that linked him to repeated incidents of misconduct. By late afternoon, Kesha convened a closed session with legal teams and key witnesses to outline the next steps. The aim was not just punishment but reform, ensuring that justice would result in meaningful change. Every detail was accounted for: disciplinary actions, systemic review, public reporting, and measures to protect whistleblowers like Simone. During a brief break, Kesha stepped outside, feeling the weight of the moment. The city hummed with life around her, but the memory of victims and the courage of those who had come forward reminded her of the stakes. One wrong step could undermine progress, but each careful decision reinforced accountability. By evening, she returned to her office, reviewing final recommendations. Each document, each testimony, each piece of evidence was a step toward a systemic transformation. Kesha knew that lasting change required patience, diligence, and unwavering resolve. Yet she also understood that today, the momentum had shifted irreversibly. As the courthouse emptied, Simone approached her with gratitude and tears in her eyes. "Judge Williams," she said softly, "I didn't think anyone would ever listen, but you did. You've changed everything." Kesha smiled faintly. "Courage matters, Simone. You took the first step. Now the system must follow." And with that, Kesha prepared for the final phase, the resolution that would either cement justice or reveal the remaining challenges. The city, the community, and the courthouse had already witnessed a reckoning. What remained was the final act, the confrontation that would determine whether accountability would truly prevail or if old patterns would try to reassert themselves. The moment was coming, and Kesha Williams was ready. The courtroom was tense. Every eye locked on the woman who had turned the trial upside down. The judge's gavel barely hung in the air before she stood, calm and composed, her black robe flowing as if it belonged to a queen, not a courtroom. The police officers who had once smirked and slapped her now fidgeted under her piercing gaze, their earlier confidence crumbling like sand. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She simply walked toward the judge's bench, her steps echoing like a drumbeat that demanded attention. The murmurs in the room grew louder, disbelief and curiosity mixing into a tangible tension that hung heavy over the chamber. No one moved, not the attorneys, not the bailiffs, not the reporters scrambling to capture a photo of this impossible moment. All that existed was the steady rhythm of her heartbeat and the awareness that something extraordinary was unfolding. She placed her hand firmly on the polished wood of the bench, eyes scanning the room as if memorizing every reaction. And then, with a measured calm, she lowered herself into the judge's seat. A gasp swept through the room, sharp and collective. "What? How? Who gave you?" A young officer stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of confusion. She didn't answer. She only leaned forward, elbows on the bench, her eyes locking on the officers who had been the aggressors just minutes ago. Memories flashed in her mind, the humiliation, the injustice, the whispers that tried to tell her she had no place in spaces like this. But now the power dynamic had shifted. She could feel it radiating from her like a low, steady hum, a force that demanded recognition and respect. She could finally speak, finally take control of the narrative that had been stolen from her. "Order," she said, her voice low but unwavering, carrying authority that silenced every whisper. The courtroom stilled. "This court will hear the truth, and those who thought they could intimidate or silence me will answer for their actions." Every word landed with precision, like a scalpel cutting through the layers of fear and pretense that had filled the room. The lead officer, the one who had struck her, shifted uncomfortably. He tried to mask his fear with a forced cough, but she saw through it. She detailed each violation, each act of disrespect, recounting events with a clarity that left no room for denials. The officers had thought their presence was enough to cow her into silence, but she had transformed that fear into power, wielding it with the precision of someone who had waited a lifetime for justice. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent save for the scratch of pens and the occasional intake of breath. The reporters scribbled frantically, realizing they were witnessing history unfold in real time. And as the judge's gavel finally came down, though not by the original judge, but in the symbolic weight of her taking the seat, it marked more than a procedural moment. It marked a shift in authority, a reclamation of dignity and control. Outside the courtroom, the story would spread like wildfire. Videos of her in the judge's seat circulated within hours, the world marveling at her audacity and composure. Social media erupted, debates ignited, but the message was clear. Power is not only in position, it is in presence, in courage, in the refusal to be erased. She had transformed an act of violence into a statement of unshakable strength. And while the legal consequences were yet to follow, the psychological victory was complete. Those who had struck her, who had underestimated her, now faced not only the law, but the weight of public scrutiny. They had been part of a system that assumed immunity, but in that moment, assumptions shattered. She rose from the bench, calm but resolute, walking down the aisle with the same confidence that had carried her forward from the first slap. The whispers followed, the camera flashes captured every step, but she paid them no mind. She had already won where it mattered most, in reclaiming her agency, in asserting that no one could define her, and in demonstrating that dignity cannot be stripped away. It must be claimed, sometimes with boldness that surprises even the boldest oppressors. When she exited the courtroom, a quiet smile curved her lips. Justice, she realized, wasn't always about the final ruling. Sometimes it was about the undeniable statement you made with your presence, your courage, and the refusal to bow to anyone who tried to diminish you. And in that moment, she had rewritten the rules of the room, the game, and perhaps even the world. Her story would inspire countless others, a testament to resilience and unyielding self-respect. The officers who had tried to intimidate her would face the consequences, both public and private, but her victory transcended punishment. It was a reclamation, a declaration that no act of aggression could silence her, and no institution could contain her resolve. And as she walked away from the courthouse steps, the sun catching the edge of her robe, she knew one truth above all. Power was never given. It was claimed, and she had claimed it, in full view of everyone who thought they could stand in her way. The streets outside the courthouse buzzed with the aftermath, the city alive with whispers and excitement. Every news outlet, every social media feed carried her name, but she didn't stop to watch, didn't pause to bask in the attention. Her mind was already several steps ahead, calculating, planning, preparing for the next phase. The courtroom had been a battleground, but the war for justice and dignity was far from over. The officers who had struck her were facing internal investigations, public outrage, and the kind of scrutiny that made their careers tremble. But that, she knew, was just the beginning. She had to ensure that their arrogance, their casual abuse of power, became an example, a lesson so stark that no one else would dare replicate it. She met with lawyers, activists, and community leaders, orchestrating a strategy that would turn the courtroom drama into a systemic confrontation. Every step was precise, every word deliberate. And then came the moment that would cement her story in history. A press conference held in the courthouse rotunda, the steps behind her crowded with supporters, advocates, and journalists hungry for a statement. She didn't shout, she didn't plead. She simply stood, calm and commanding, and recounted the ordeal, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been silenced, underestimated, or humiliated. The words struck like thunder: accountability, justice, dignity. The city listened, the country listened, The world watched as she delivered the kind of speech that made people stop, reflect, and act. Donations poured in for her advocacy campaigns, petitions were signed, and movements gained traction, all sparked by her refusal to be cowed. The officers faced suspension, legal action, and public condemnation, but beyond that, a cultural shift had begun. People realized that no badge, no title, no institution gave the right to demean, belittle, or harm. Weeks later, in a quiet moment alone, she revisited the courtroom in her mind. The weight of the gavel, the hush of the spectators, the moment she claimed the judge's seat, it all replayed with vivid clarity. That instant of courage had rippled far beyond the walls of the room. She had sparked conversations about justice, accountability, and the courage to confront wrongs that many had long ignored. And then came an unexpected turn. The original judge, who had been startled and initially resistant, reached out to her. Not to reprimand, not to dispute, but to commend her bravery and insight. The judge confessed that her actions had reminded him of the core purpose of the law: fairness, protection, and the power of conscience. Together, they initiated reforms within the courthouse, ensuring that protocols were rewritten to prevent abuses of authority. Her boldness had transformed even those who were part of the very system she had challenged. The story didn't end with headlines or viral clips. It became a movement, a symbol of what courage could accomplish. Invitations came from across the nations, schools, organizations, forums, asking her to speak, to share her story, to guide others in asserting their rights and dignity. She traveled, she taught, she inspired. And each time she carried with her the memory of that courtroom, the slap that had ignited her, and the seat she had claimed as a declaration of strength. Years later, as she reflected on that day, she realized something profound. The power of a single moment, when met with courage, could alter the trajectory of countless lives. It wasn't just about the officers, the courtroom, or even the headlines. It was about reclaiming agency, rewriting narratives, and showing the world that no act of aggression could define her. She had turned humiliation into triumph, oppression into opportunity, and fear into influence. And as she looked toward the horizon, she knew her mission was far from over. But she also knew this undeniable truth. Once someone discovers their power, once they refuse to bow to injustice, there is no limit to the change they can inspire. That courtroom was the beginning, but the legacy she created would last far longer than any single trial, any single act of defiance. In the end, the slap that was meant to break her became the catalyst for an unstoppable force. She had turned pain into purpose, anger into action, and doubt into unshakable authority. The officers who had tried to intimidate her became cautionary tales. The world saw what courage looked like, and she, unbowed and resolute, walked forward into a future she had claimed with every step, every word, and every act of unyielding strength. Her story would be told for generations, not just as a tale of justice, but as a blueprint for how to face oppression, reclaim power, and rise no matter the odds. The woman who had been slapped in court had taken the judge's seat, and in doing so had taken her place in history. Did this story inspire you to stand up for yourself or someone else? Comment below and share your thoughts. We want to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to RES Stories for more real, powerful stories that show courage, justice, and triumph. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change your life.